Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host here with Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com today. We'll get into the Steelers hosting Amarius Mims and why it's looking more and more like the first-round pick will be an offensive tackle. But what else has to happen with that? We'll talk about that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet or more. That's $200 back if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before the show, we are joined today by Alan Saunders, who's still in Orlando, Florida, mucking it up with the owners of the NFL. Alan, did you get any of those billionaire dollars washed off on you over this week?
No comment. No comment. I'm gonna keep that one. I'm gonna keep that one close to the vest.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into the news of the day. We've talked a lot about the owners' meetings, but I want to just talk about some of the some of the things that we've been looking at here just for the Steelers. And the Steelers hosted one of the bigger names in the first round candidates, and that's Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims. He's on an official pre-draft visit. You guys wrote about it on SteelersNow.com. Alan, it just the idea of getting Mims, it seems like a foregone conclusion, not a foregone conclusion is going to happen, but that he is high up on the big board for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, and he should be. He has a lot of raw talent, much like Broderick Jones last year. Where do you see him in the hierarchy of how many other players that are legit Steelers targets who could fall to 20 do you think actually rank above him? Like, where is he in your hierarchy of holy crap, he's at 20, the Steelers get to take him versus, maybe a J.C. Latham or someone else?
Well, he is on we have at SteelersNow.com, we have a Steelers draft big board, and when they did a formal interview with someone at the Combine, we put a little Combine logo next to their name. When they met with them at the Senior Bowl or at the Shrine Bowl, we put a little logo next to their name. When they had Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan at their Pro Day, we got a little Mike Tomlin head next to their name. And when when they got a top 30 visit, they're trying not to call them that, but whatever, that's what everybody calls them. They're allowed to have 30 pre-draft visitors. When they get one of those, there's a little 30 icon next to their name. Amarius Mims is the only player with 3 little icons next to his name on the whole big board right now.
Well,
okay, so I think it's pretty clear that the Pittsburgh Steelers are interested in Amarius Mims. Now, that's half the equation, right? Will he be there at number 20? That's the other part of it. And I think he is likely to be. Even though he's a really talented player, he played 8 games and then he was injured. And so he has some projectability concerns that a guy like Latham or Taliesin Fuaga or Olufashinu don't have. And so I have on my just sort of personal ranking, and we haven't done these officially yet, so I don't know, subject to change, I guess. But just if you ask me right now, like, write them out, who are the top tackles? I've got Mims no better than 5th, probably 6th. And most years, that guy's there at number 20. This is a really good tackle class, but everything I keep hearing has teams lined up at the top of the draft to pick quarterbacks, that Jaden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy are going to be not just top 20 picks, but top 4 or 5 picks. And so if those guys are all going up, guess who's coming down? Guys like Joe Alt, guys like Fashion, who are going to fall into that 5 to 15 range. That's going to push other players down the list. And so I do think that not only are the Steelers very interested in Amarius Mims, he is probably one of the best players that we should expect to be available at number 20. Doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, but I think he's more likely than not to be available at number 20. And I think there's nobody else that really, like, you could say, like, I do think they'd be really interested in take J.C. Latham or Taliesin Fuaga, and those guys have 2 little logos next to their name on our big board. But I just think those guys are more likely to go ahead because they're more sure things. I think Mims is the one that will fall to the Steelers.
is his injury concern a red flag or just like a yellow flag for the Steelers? Because, like, I mean, obviously, from what we're saying here, if the Steelers are putting this much investment into seeing this guy, maybe it's not a red flag unless this is part of them evaluating to see if it is one, to try to get as much knowledge of this guy of this guy. But like you said, if he played 8 games, he's very raw. But his athleticism, when you watch him on tape, he bulldozes people. It reminds me of Broderick Jones, his teammate from just last year. And what the Steelers want. I mean, listen, Mike Tomlin, he would have no problem just taking all the Georgia players if he could, right? Like, it's Jalen Carter, come on down, like kind of what the Eagles were doing on the defensive side of the ball. But if you take the best part of the offensive side of the ball, George Pickens, Broderick Jones, and now Amarius Mims. I guess say, what are we going to do? Cedric Van Pran, like just like a few rounds later, like
yep, just keep
it rolling. Why not?
Amari Lassiter, he's good too. Yep, sure, fine, yeah, absolutely. I got no problem with that.
I look at the situation there, and it makes it continue to look like you bring up Fuaga, you bring up Latham, you bring up Mims. Is this kind of locking the Steelers into just being like, you know what, like unless someone ridiculous like Rome Odunze or like Terrion Mitchell or Terrion Arnold or Quinion Mitchell.
Would you want to continue the Georgia conversation? Brock Bowers?
Okay, if someone ridiculous like that falls down to 20, then it's like, well, this is a different conversation. But to me, it's like unless something like that happens, like it looks like a tackle is the guy there again, unless like you're talking about one of the top, like your top corner in this class. Like Quinion Mitchell's my top corner. If he's sitting there and it's Fuaga's been off the board, Fashanu's off the board, of course Alt's off the board, like that becomes a tougher situation for me. But Mike Tomlin was just talking at the owners' meetings about we want to win games with our bigs. Well, they need to invest in those bigs to win with those bigs. And like they did last year, they got better. Sayamalu was a great pair with Daniels. Broderick Jones, when he got in, he made a difference. But they still have to finish this line if they want this to be the dominant part of their offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comparisons to Broderick Jones are interesting. I mean, I feel like Amarius Mims is like Broderick Jones's bigger, younger brother. Like they have a lot of similarities. He's bigger. He might be better. Like, he might be better. When you look at the tape, okay, it's 8 games, and you kind of got to throw 2 of those out because one, like, it's like FBS team and an FCS team, or a group of 5 team and an FCS team, right? So you really only have 6 games of, like, real competition to look at. But those 6 games are probably better than every other offensive lineman in this draft class. So is it a red flag? I don't know. It's like a double yellow flag, right? Because you have the one yellow flag of the injury itself. Is he healthy? Is he going to continue to be healthy? He had a hamstring injury at the combine. Is this just going to be a guy who's – we've seen this time and time again. Guys of that size, not all of them are just able to continue to produce athletically year after year. Right. Some of them just have continual injury concerns. Is that going to be a problem? That's yellow flag number 1. Yellow flag number 2 is – he did sit behind better players like Jamari Salyer and Broderick Jones. And so when he got his 1 year to play at Georgia, he gets hurt and has to have ankle surgery. And he plays 6 games against major college competition. So, I mean, look, we've seen and talked about a lot over the course of the season that things can fool you in small samples. Like, you can't be sure of an evaluation that is made on 6 games when there are guys in this draft that have played 50. Like, that is an enormous difference. And so I think it just makes the projection, like, you have to deal with a lot more uncertainty. The other flip of the coin is you're getting a player that you probably shouldn't be able to get at number 20. Like, he probably should. If he played another full season looking like the 6 games that you see on tape, he'd be the number 1 tackle in this class.
Maybe that's the bargain that you get there by the injury situation. It's one of those gambles, right? Like, just banking on that, kind of what happened with Darnell Washington, and a much lesser stakes there because he was a third round pick, and he down there. Too. But what'd you say?
George Pickens too. Very similar.
Yeah.
Both of those guys were guys that probably should have been drafted way ahead of where they were. There were injury and other concerns that caused them to drop, and the Steelers were the team to pull the trigger. So if I'm making a projection based on past behavior, I think right now it's Amarius Mims.
It's looking that way. Let's presume that happens. What comes next after that? Because there's still other major needs the Steelers have not addressed. We'll address that on the other side of this break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right to your phone so that you can buy tickets without it being stressful as you get ready to enjoy your favorite events. Game Time is an app where you can download right to your phone, or you can go to their website, gametime.co. It makes it a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your favorite sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. You get killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're about to have. When you download the Game Time app, you can look right in, and you can see all the great prices that are available to you. You can also see the view from your seats so that you know that you're getting the right price, the right value for the right price every single time. You know you're not getting scammed out. Also, with exclusive flash deals on all the different events, you always get the best price. And when they say that they always get the best price, their guarantee means that if you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKED ON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's just lock it in. Whether it's Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, Talisa Fuaga, whoever it is, Joe Alt, they're getting an offensive tackle in the first round. What has to come next with the Steelers? And this isn't just with the second round pick. This is with free agency, presuming that like the situation that you foresee, if the Steelers are sitting there with the 51st overall pick, center still hasn't been addressed. We've talked about like the options are very slim right now in free agency. So if they're going to get a center that's starter capable, Mike Tomlin said there's a few in this class, but not a whole lot. Presumably, you'd have to make it with that second round pick. So we're talking about, does Zach Frazier last that long? Is it Cedric Van Pran Granger? What's the option there? Or is it a vet at center and you're investing somewhere else with that second round pick? Because, the Steelers still could use another interior defensive presence next to Keanu Benton. Braden Fisk, one of the guys they brought in for their 30 visits. He's a guy that would fit right there. If he's still around, I feel like that'd be great value to get a person like him. But we also know they really like this wide receiver class. That'd be a great spot to get a wide receiver like Roman Wilson, a personal favorite of mine. What do you think is the most likely plan that coincides with a tackle in the first round that the Steelers would they double up on the offensive line with 2 picks, or would they want to spread that around?
I don't know. I think it probably depends on the board. I mean, look, I think Zach Frazier is going to go before 51. I do. And I think Cedric Van Pran will be there at 84, probably. I don't know. I don't really understand why he is being evaluated as so much lesser than the other 2 centers. Like when I watch the tape, I think it's pretty similar to the other guys. Like I would not have, just me personally, 50 picks between Jackson Powers-Johsnon and Cedric Van Pran. I don't think there's that big of a difference. But it is a position that not every team needs, and if you don't need one, they are going to fall. So maybe it's just positional value. I don't know. But I think the evaluation, I think he's a good player. I think he could start right away. I think what they're telling us from these visits, though, is that wide receiver round 2 is very possible. I mean, if I look at some of these guys that are doubled up on our list, right? Ladd McConkey, Xavier Leggett, Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall, Malachi Corley. These are guys that are probably second round picks or maybe early third round picks, some of them. But if you want to get one of those guys, you're probably talking about using 51 on wide receiver. So what is the plan at center? I don't know. There's no free agents left. I mean, there's Brian Allen from the Rams, who was replaced last year and has had injury problems, but has been a starting center. Omar Khan brought up sort of unprompted the possibility of a trade at center, which I hadn't really thought of. I looked around and really scoured some depth charts, and Luke Fortner in Jacksonville and Liam Eichenberg are the 2 guys. The 2 guys that I came up with that have started at center and their teams upgraded. They signed. That's where Morse went, and that's where Brewer went, right? But they still have their incumbent starters. Maybe they could be convinced to give up one of those guys. Maybe that's the plan. I don't know. But if it's tackle, wide receiver, and you don't have anything else at center, you're essentially throwing a Hail Mary that Cedric Van Pran is there at pick 84. It feels extremely un-Steelers to put themselves in a position where you are now just incumbent on the whole rest of the league playing along in order for you to get a player that you – I was listening to Mike Tannenbaum from ESPN to the conference call today, and he said, yeah, some things are needs and some things are musts. Like, a need is like, okay, you need to upgrade this, or this guy's getting old and he's going to need replaced. You may have a contract issue coming up in a position. You need to get a guy. A must is, if you had to field a team right now, you literally could not do it. Center is a must for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. I don't know if that could change between now and the draft. They certainly seem like that's what they're planning, that with tackle being the first round focus and wide receiver being the second round focus. But I don't know what the plan is.
I don't know either. That's my thing here is that, it also makes more sense if they get a center in the second round and it is Van Pran or Frazier, and answer one of those guys. There are third round wide receivers I think work. Like if you could find a way to get Malachi Corley in the third round, I think you still got a good option at wide receiver there,
Brendan Rice, Jalen McMillan, Jamari Thrash. Like, it's a deep one. Jermaine Burton, Johnny Wilson from Florida State. It's a deep wide receiver class. There are impact guys all the way down to their second, third round pick at 98. They can let wide receiver go, but they sure don't seem like that's what they're doing. Like it,
right.
Ricky Pearsall is not going to make it to 84. Like he's in for a top 30 visit. Xavier Legette is not going to make it to 84. He's in for a top 30 visit. They met with A.D. Mitchell and Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman and Brian Thomas all the way up to Roma Dunze at the combine. Those were formal visits. Like these are first round picks or early second round picks. Those are guys that probably won't make it to 51. So it sure doesn't seem like they're aiming at the third round for wide receiver, even though center is, as Mike Tannenbaum put it, a must for this team at some point early in the draft.
That's where I'm that's where I'm wondering how this plays out, because center is too important to this team right now. Like and I know it's not it's not the value that you want that you want with the first round pick. So if you don't get Jackson Powers-Johsnon, then you have to try to get one of those guys to say, and you have to get one of those guys to say, because like Bo Limmer is a guy, like, listen, I liked his athleticism in the combine, but I watched a little bit of his tape and I'm like, that'd be taking a big roll of the dice, not Kendrick Green level, but
there are other guys I like. Tanner Bortolini from Wisconsin, like Connor Norzad from Penn State. Like there are other centers out there that I think are interesting draft picks, but they're not guys that should be starting as rookies at all. Like that's a bad idea.
Yeah, and that's where the Steelers, I think, are in an interesting position to try to avoid having to do something like that, or bring back Mason Cole for cheap. Like that would.
I think it's starting to look like an extremely attractive option compared to what's out there. I don't know. I don't know what. I mean, unless they're just way more faithful in Nate Herbig than honestly I think they should be, or they have given any previous intention of being. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, Mason Cole's about to be the drunk dude from the Simpsons meme. They throw him out, and then he's just still sitting there right at the bar afterwards. That's exactly what Mason Cole's looking like he's going to be if they don't draft one of these dudes. And, hey, maybe even the move is to sign him anyways and then draft one of these guys. And that way, if something goes bad, if someone gets hurt, you have the guy from last year but on a cheaper contract because you didn't get anybody else. But last thing here before we move on to more of like tracking visits and other things the Steelers have been doing here. What about, and I brought this up in a recent mock draft, what about double dipping at center? If let's say you get Zach Frazier or Van Pran, and then you get to those later rounds, and you're in the sixth round or so, and Penn State's center is there, or you're one of those other guys. Is that something you could foresee happening? Because like right now, again, whenever we ask them about center, Mike Tomlin and Omar like, oh, we got Nate Herbig, and we're just like, stop playing with me, like stop playing in my face.
Well, Mike was a little bit more, I'll say, honest about their center circumstances this week. He was like, "We have to make a move there." I'm like, "Yeah, you don't know. You're not telling any secrets here, Mike. We know that you have to make a move there. Everybody knows you have to make a move there." So I felt like it was, I kind of wrote that story. People were like, you think? And I'm like, well, look, the last time we asked, that's not what they said. And then they didn't sign anyone. So it just sort of becomes important that they did acknowledge that they had to sign a center or have to sign a center or do something at center between now and the start of the season. I could see them, especially if it's Jackson Powers-Johsnon or Graham Barton, because those guys have a little positional flexibility. It's not a waste to draft a center behind them because maybe it turns out to be a center you could draft a guard. Or if the second guy you draft is Hunter Dorzat, who has played 4 out of the 5 positions on the offensive line for Penn State, like, yeah, you could draft that guy because he's probably a center, but maybe he'll be able to help you in some other places. I think it would be hard to see them drafting like Zach Frazier, who is just a center, and then come back with, I don't know, Bo Limmer, who's probably also just a center. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but if it's one of these guys with some positional versatility, absolutely.
I think that's certainly something that could be stirring up there. We'll keep you up to date with all the Steelers move there, but we want to talk about all the visits they've done, whether it's been visits that Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan have made versus also people that they brought in for visits as their top 30 visits. We'll talk about all that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 back that you can use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can start betting on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins, and that's only on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's talk about the different visits that the Steelers have made so far. Let's talk about pro day visits real quick before we get into the top 30 list. The Steelers skipped over LSU. They didn't skip over, but Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin did. And that's an interesting thing there when a lot of people have been linking them to Brian Thomas as a potential first round pick for them. And he hasn't been one of their top 30 visits yet. Granted, we do know that they talked to him at the combine. When you see this, the way the things that they're doing right now, what are you seeing the most out of? What are the things telling you the tea leaves reading of what the Steelers are planning here?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess if you don't know, the Steelers have sent Mike Tomlin and or Omar Khan to the pro day of their first round pick, or I guess and or Kevin Colbert, going all the way back. I think the last one they did was David DeCastro in 2012, and so that's a pretty significant streak. It's something we pay a lot of attention to. It also doesn't mean everything, right? I mean, like, they didn't go to Iowa, but Cooper DeJean didn't even work out at his pro day. And same thing with Quinyon Mitchell, right? And so Toledo. So are we supposed to cross those guys off the board? I don't know. I think they've made some changes in the way they do business under Omar. I think that's clear. One of the things we saw when you look at this list, there's not a lot of duplication of effort. If it was a guy they talked to at a Senior Bowl, even if it's a guy I'm pretty sure they like a lot, like Quinyon Mitchell. I know they like Quinyon Mitchell. They sent scouts to go scout Toledo in person during the season. That's dedication to liking a player. He's the only draftable guy on Toledo. There aren't even very many draftable guys in the whole rest of the MAC in this class. Really down year for that conference. So like they were on him from the beginning. They were on it. Mike Tomlin was all over that guy at the Senior Bowl, talking him up. Big long one-on-one meeting. They didn't go back to him with the combine. They didn't go back to his pro day. So should we cross him off the list? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I do think that the obvious ones remain obvious. But I think like things like skipping Brian Thomas's pro day, and that's a big school. There's a lot of prospects. I do think that tells us something, right? I mean, how many guys are going to get drafted at LSU this year? 4, 5, 6?
Right.
And not just that, one of the things that Mike Tomlin really likes about this process is when you go to a pro day, it's not just the seniors that are there. All the underclassmen are there showing up to
Exactly.
support their teammate. He gets to shake hands with people, meet the next guy who's coming, right? He's told us when he drafted Broderick Jones that one of the first times that he got on his radar was when he was talking to Georgia prospects at a pro day before and asking them about who's the next guy. And he said, "Oh yeah, you should be watching out for this one." And so, can I explain away not going to Iowa or not going to Toledo? Absolutely. But if you think about Washington, Washington, Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, Michael Penix, Jalen McMillan. I think maybe we should turn down the noise about that. LSU, half a dozen guys. Oregon, same thing. Like Troy Franklin, Jackson Powers-Johnsnon, Bo Nix. I think you turn it down a little bit if those guys skipped those pro days with big numbers of top draft picks available.
That's the thing, is that I think if you're in those situations, it's interesting to see how that plays out with what the Steelers are trying to do. Because you're also trying to figure out what they want. Mike Tomlin wants to see these guys in person, because it's also even beyond who they're picking now. Like there's the infamous, or I guess kind of internet famous clip of him, telling Justin Fields like, "Hey, I came here to see you today." And that was what, 3-4 years ago, when Justin Fields was coming out and getting ready for the NFL draft at Ohio State. Mike Tomlin knew they were never getting a chance to sniff Justin Fields, but guess who he's about to be coaching this upcoming season? Similarly, how he talked to Minkah Fitzpatrick, just like he was like, "Hey, we know we could never pick that guy. He was going way before, but guess who he's been coaching for the past several years?" It's kind of what Tomlin does to kind of cover his bases and make sure that, like, hey, I'm aware of who all ththese guys are, not just their talent, but also I want to know who these guys are as people, so that I'm not, when they're available, we're not throwing a fit over and trying to bring in a guy that we find that if we spent an hour with, we'd say, "Oh, that guy's destructive. Don't bring him in."
How many times have you and I sat in that press conference room with the Steelers when they're having a new press conference for somebody who's new to come in, and you ask the guy about his first interaction with Mike Tomlin? I was like, "Oh yeah, he talked to me when I was coming out. We blah blah blah. We had dinner at my pro day. We he came for a visit." Like, they literally all have a story about Mike Tomlin scouting them in the draft process. Like, it probably is 100%. I've never actually sat there and tried to chart it out, but it's almost everybody, and that's not a mistake. So, look, their time is limited. Some of these things happen at the same time, right? Like, somebody's pro day was the day they're hosting Russell Wilson for a visit. Well, okay, you're not going to that one. I get it. Somebody's pro day is on the first day of free agency. Okay, Omar's not going to that one anyway. All right, and so you can kind of explain away some things, but I think it does show clear interest in the I don't think we should cross off the guys just because Tomlin and Khan weren't at their pro day, but I think them being there does. They went to Clemson. It's not that deep of a draft class for Clemson this year. It's Nate Wiggins, It's Jeremiah Trotter, Will Shipley at running back, which I think we could almost sort of cross off the board right now.
Roll.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, they've got 2 D tackles, and I think there's a center. Will Putnam is a way down the line, 6th or 7th rounder. So, I mean, they're only going there to see 1 or 2 guys. We got to keep Nate Wiggins on the board. We got to consider Jeremiah Trotter on day 2. So I think going is a green light, but I don't think not going is a red light.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, real quick before we get out of here, let's take a look back and look at the players who are their top 30 visits so far. So far, you've got 3 receivers in Pearsall, Corley, and Leggett. You've got 3 offensive tackles in Fuaga, Glover, and Mims. 3 defensive tackles in Fisk out of Florida State, Darius Robinson, and Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa, and then a running back, Dillian Johnson. So that's a very heavy focus on those 3 positions: wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive tackle. Is that kind of the sense here? It's interesting that they haven't brought in any center officially yet, but is that kind of the rotation of players that, other than center, is most likely to just be the first, second, and third round picks?
I mean, it kind of feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, corner, I guess,
corner should be in play too. Yes,
I think it needs to be. Like we said, talked about with Wiggins, there's obvious, interest there, but they also did something at corner with Dante Jackson. I do think they like their young corners on the outside, guys like Rush and Trice. I don't think they're going to want to just not let those guys get a chance. and that's what would be happening if you say used another first-round pick on a corner, right? But I think they're going to draft a corner at some point. They need somebody in the slot. They don't have anybody. So maybe it's a guy like Ennis Rakestraw, Kamari Lassiter, Kalen King, TJ Tampa, Chris Abrams Drain, Mike Sainristil, Max Melton. But again, these are not guys they're bringing in for visits. The visits have been D tackle, O tackle, wide receiver, like that. Yeah. Like there's one random running back. Also, not included in those top 30 visits are anyone that played at Pitt, West Virginia, or played high school football in the Whippeal. So this year, that they get Zach Frazier for free. Also, Mac and Salvis and MJ Devonshire and anybody else that went from Pitt. So they don't count against that top 30. So they'll probably bring all those guys in. I assume that Frazier will come in too, but he's not in that top 30.
Absolutely. We'll keep you abreast of all things here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, but you can also find that at SteelersNow.com, where Alan and Saunders, Nick Farabaugh, and their team do a great job there. Alan, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Yeah, SteelersNow.com. You can check out the big board. It's right there in the top drop-down menu, and it's like a sticky post. If you just scroll down beyond the first few that are at the top there, big old picture of Omar's face from the combine. So going to take a look at that. It's got all kinds of information on it, and we'll keep going, man. I'm excited to. I'm now feeling like we're in the home stretch of this draft process. We're bringing it home. I'm feeling good about my knowledge of the class. Feeling good about the Steelers' intentions. About time to start to make some predictions.
Absolutely. We'll be making some predictions ourselves here on the Locked On Steelers podcast very soon. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.